I'd rather be a pig than a fascist. And I stick my neck out for nobody. These are two famous quotes from Porco Rosso and Casablanca respectively. At first glance, both seem completely unrelated, but they perfectly summarise the essence of each film's protagonist, where one is a declaration made from a bitter experience of life, the other is an unconvincing lie. But which is which? One of the lesser-known films by Studio Ghibli, Porco Rosso follows an anthropomorphic pig called Porco, who flies a plane and survives by hunting down pirates along Italy's Adriatic coast during the Great Depression. Whereas Casablanca is one of the most recognisable wartime dramas in history. Set in French North Africa in 1941, American expatriate Rick Blaine navigates the dangerous interstice that exists between enemy and ally of the fascist authorities that control Morocco. At first glance, the similarities are superficial. One is a typical genre piece of film noir, whilst the other is a love letter to it. Both feature a cynical, jaded, middle-aged protagonist with a complex past. Both take solace in moments of romantic sentimentalism, and both are set against the dangerous backdrop of a mounting conflict. But look beneath the surface and the similarities run far deeper. Casablanca and Porco Rosso are two sides of the same coin, or the protagonists are. What unites the pessimism of Rick and Porco is a mask of reluctant neutrality. At the start of Casablanca, Rick remarks that he indeed sticks his neck out for nobody. By the film's end, he makes the ultimate choice to let Victor Lajlo, a famous Czechoslovak resistance fighter, flee from Morocco with his wife, who's also Rick's ex-lover. At the start of Porco Rosso, we see Porco refuse to support anyone but himself, and yet by the end he risks his life to not only save a newfound comrade, but the very pirates he hunted for a living. Neutrality serves as a disguise, by which both Rick and Porco hide the pain of their respective pasts and navigate the world at large, but both ultimately reject it. In this video, I will be looking at how neutrality is explored in both of these films, and how ultimately it's treated as a disingenuous cover-up. But first, we need some good old historical context. Casablanca was publicly released in January 1943. By then, the world had been embroiled in the Second World War for more than 3 years, with the United States still far from the military powerhouse it would become by the war's end. The propaganda value of Casablanca as a pro-Allied work wasn't lost, as countries geared up for the Casablanca Conference, where plans for defeating the Axis powers would be formalised. Casablanca held a very clear role within the Allied war effort. Its main antagonist is Major Strasser, a typical Nazi heel clicker wholeheartedly devoted to serving the Third Reich, whilst his Italian allies and Vichy French collaborators are framed as either incompetent idiots or corrupt turncoats. On the surface, it's fairly typical of what you'd expect a wartime Hollywood film to be. The good guys join the side of freedom and everyone ends up happy. But underneath the seemingly simple nature of Casablanca lies a contradiction. Richard Raskin, a professor in film studies, writes that Casablanca was intended to demonize not just the Nazi regime, but Vichy France in particular. After the surrender of France in June 1940, French officials set up a new regime in the city of Vichy, officially neutral but essentially acting as a German puppet state. Those who refused to surrender were known as the Free French, led by famous General Charles de Gaulle. By November 1942, the Allies launched invasions across Morocco and Algeria, coinciding with a German invasion of Vichy France that ended its neutrality. Despite being an informal member of the Axis powers, the United States allowed Vichy French officials to continue administering North Africa, even after the Allies seized control. On paper, it made very little sense. Surely it would have been preferable to support the Free French instead of enemy collaborators. In practice, it was simply easier for the United States to keep the bureaucracy that had run North Africa intact. And so the United States was faced with a weird paradox. Despite supporting French resistance efforts, they simultaneously supported those who had allied with their enemies. Raskin notes Casablanca's contradiction, and states that the film muddied the waters between anti-Free French policies of the American government and public support for the Free French. And we see this contradiction play out in the film itself. Rick's unusual comrade, Louis Renault, is a Vichy French captain, and over the course of the film oscillates between secondary antagonist and ally. At its heart, Casablanca isn't just a piece of pro-Allied propaganda, but a film that both demonstrates the nuances of wartime alignments and the expedients needed to find unlikely allies. The reluctant neutrality that Rick sheds doesn't bring him to just fight on the side of liberty, but demands that he overlook the flaws of his new friend. Regardless of his redemption, Captain Renault is still a corrupt and sexually exploitative official, and neither is Rick himself a guardian angel. For the most part, he turns a blind eye to Renault's womanizing, and doesn't bother to intervene when his associate Ugarte is killed at the start of the film, as Renault perfectly lays out with a hint of sarcasm.
Ricky, I'm gonna miss you. Apparently you're the only one in Casablanca who has even less scruples than I.
Oh, thanks.
Yet, Rick learns to stick his neck out regardless. If we consider reluctant neutrality to be the theme that links Porco Rosso and Casablanca together, then there's a key difference in its presentation. Whereas Rick decides to throw his lot in on the side of righteous liberty, Porco's brand of reluctant neutrality is far more personal. In Suzanne Napier's biography of Hayao Miyazaki, she reveals that Porco Rosso's origins were as a short travel animation for Japanese businessmen. By the time of its release in 1992, Porco Rosso was radically different than anything Miyazaki could have predicted. Growing up, Miyazaki embraced both pacifism and became a staunch Marxist. Not the Stalinist collectivization kind, mind you. He despised Japan's imperial past, along with all forms of conflict, reflected through the prevalence of nuclear apocalypse in other Ghibli films like Castle in the Sky and Nausicaa. Just like Miyazaki, Porco is an unabashed cynic, to the point that singer Takiko Kato equated the two. By the time the film was released, Miyazaki was already becoming disillusioned with Marxism. If the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 cracked this faith, then it truly shattered with the fall of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia had maintained its status as the only communist state in Europe that did not follow the line of the Soviets or the Chinese Communist Party. It was hailed as a bastion of true socialism by many young idealists. And when it fell, those dreams came crashing down with it. As Miyazaki put it in an interview, "We felt that the world was getting better bit by bit. Our history was that things would get better. So when the Yugoslavian ethnic wars happened, we were dumbfounded. What was going on? Were we just going backward?" By 1929, Mussolini's regime had been in power for 7 years. In Porco Rosso, we see that the authorities are still cementing their control. People openly joke about the fascists. Sky pirates fly above the Adriatic without interference from the Italian Air Force. Yet still the shadow of fascism grows taller by the day. Unlike Rick in Casablanca, Porco is already a national hero. He fought for his country in the First World War and became the greatest ace to soar the skies, and yet he's wanted by the very state he originally served. How could a man who took a path that appeared so righteous in Casablanca end up in such a state? Both Casablanca and Porco Rosso operate along the same narrative axis. Rick emerges at the end of Casablanca as a man with renewed convictions. His selfish mask has been shed in favour of a desire to serve on the side of justice and to do what's right. His compatriot Victor Laszlo welcomes him back to the fight and remarks that "this time I know we will win." But Porco has already undergone this journey by the start of Rosso. What it comes down to is that Porco and Rick occupy different points of the same thematic timeline. Rick ultimately enlists in the cause of his side, as did Porco, and Porco became disillusioned because of it. Patriotism, honour, and righteousness became bywords for fighting the pointless war. For all of the Allies' rhetoric in the Second World War, they would ultimately fail to uphold the values that they had professed. The Yalta Conference doomed millions in Eastern Europe to live under regimes they didn't want. Hundreds of thousands of people were uprooted to make way for arbitrarily drawn borders, and persecution reigned over people that had wished to be liberated. In my favourite scene of Porco Rosso, Porco recounts his experience in one of the last battles of the Great War. After narrowly escaping death, he fell unconscious in his plane and awoke to a dreamlike realm in the sky. Above him stretched a white band as far as the eye could see. As he slowly regained his bearings, allies and enemies alike ascended to join the countless other planes and pilots that had fallen in past battles. Yet Porco slowly started to descend back to Earth. And it's this single scene that encapsulates the character of Porco. At his core, Porco holds immense self-hatred and survivor's guilt. In his own words, the good guys were the ones who died. Was the cause really worth fighting for if it left nobody behind? Miyazaki presents the concept of patriotic duty as a con, a ploy designed to deceive thousands of men like Porco and Rick into fighting some meaningless conflict. But even so, Porco is faced with the same choice as Rick: continue along the path of self-hatred or abandon his mask of reluctant neutrality. When that choice is finally made, he fights not for himself, nor for an abstract concept like duty, but for the friends he has left. At the film's climax, Porco risks his life to fight Curtis in order to win the freedom of his sidekick Theo, and for a brief moment after, Porco loses his pig-like form and becomes human. Both films treat neutrality as an unnatural state of being. The audience learns that Rick and Porco have a past that's anything but neutral. Rick smuggled guns to the Ethiopian army during Italy's invasion, and directly volunteered for the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War. Porco refused to join the Italian Air Force after the fascists came to power. Napier points out that even Porco Rosso's signature song Le Temps de Série is strongly associated with the Paris Commune, a short-lived attempt at a socialist state during the midst of the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. So whenever both protagonists consistently reaffirm their selfishness to the audience, it seems like they're trying to convince not us but themselves. When Nazi officers start singing German war songs in Casablanca, Victor Lajlo orders the band to play the French national anthem. Had a scuffle broken out, Rick would have been held responsible for failing to keep his customers in check, and yet he merely nods to the band in tacit acknowledgement. When Porco defeats the Mama Aiuto gang in Rosso, he lets them keep half of the profits for themselves, even though the pirates are also wanted by the Air Force. Based on this, the neutrality of Rick and Porco is clearly a deception. The veil they spent years building is slowly broken down with every partial act. It's a coping mechanism for regret and apathy, not there by choice, but necessary to protect their fragile mental states. In Porco's case, he believes that the life he lives is akin to being in hell. For Rick, he drinks himself into a pathetic stupor after so much as glancing Ilsa Lund. Whenever a scene with bygone days, or as time goes by comes on, the audience is hit with a mix of sentimentality and melancholy. In these moments, every instance is a constant reminder of what both characters have decided to give up. Only once both characters make the painful decision to cast aside the walls they had spent so long constructing, do they find the solace they had always yearned for. The reluctant neutrality they had clung to would finally wash away, replaced with a desire to fight for what they hold dear, and to no longer be a bystander. Whether a selfish pig or a guy who sticks his neck out for nobody, both ultimately become the arbiters of action they were always meant to be. And that brings us to the end of the video. You could probably tell, but I don't exactly have a throat anymore. Regardless, thank you so much for sticking around this far. As usual, hit that like button if you enjoyed, subscribe to stay up to date. As ever, this has been Irovic, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.